Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. My name is Nat. I'm Head of Strategy at Alpha Venture DAO, and I'll be guiding you through our next session on Web3. Why is it the next revolution? And in this session, I'll be talking all about why Web3 matters, and we'll get thoughts from leading experts and figures in the Web3 space, whom I'll introduce shortly, on what do we need to get to the point where Web3 is actually usable. So today I'll be joining by Sandeep, Peng, co-founder of ScrollTech, Shailesh Lakhani from Managing Director of Sequoia Capital, Sandeep, Nailwal, co-founder of Polygon. So without further introduction, let's get right into it. Hey, Sandy, how are you today?
Hey, Nat, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So maybe just give us a little bit of background on, before we transition the conversation to Web3, what are the problems in Web2 today? Just to lay it out to the audience.
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question. I think there's not necessarily any problems with Web 2. I think a lot of centralized companies start by making super useful products, and they end up attracting as many users and developers and partnership and capital as possible in order to make their platforms more valuable. And this creates what I think Chris Dixon calls a multi-sided network effect. And on the plus side, the benefits are that billions of users gets to use these valuable products for free. But as we move up the adoption curve, they exercise full control over network participants and eventually become extractive of user data. And so users give up their privacy in control for the free products and control of their own data. And competition with other Web2 companies starts to kind of create a force where everyone creates their walled garden, and that ends up stifling innovation as smaller companies find it harder and harder to compete in this environment. And another issue is that Web2 executives and the board preferences have an overwhelming effect on society. Things like fake news and whom gets banned from Twitter and privacy laws, etc. And all of these things have a political slant, which is how to play. And I think in Web3, the difference is that the platforms are owned by users and operated by users, and some projects with tokens give users like an ownership stake, and as such, platforms grow. And as they grow, they become like collaborative effort, and the incentives are aligned with the protocols. And data control is no longer a massive issue, and community governance becomes like a feature of Web3 that all the dApps are currently constantly experimenting with. At Scroll, this speaks to our core value and is fundamental to our approach. Like to maintain an open source environment, we've been developing in an open source environment since day one, and that enables anyone to contribute. And our mission to unlocking possibilities for Web3 development through cutting edge ZK EVM research and technology implementation hopefully kind of makes it possible for anybody from anywhere around the world to participate in Web3 and kind of enjoy the benefits of such.
Great, thanks so much for laying the background for us on what are some of the issues that we're facing in Web2 today. I'll turn the mic over to Shailesh. So Shailesh, in your view as a venture capitalist, how big are these problems? Are they actually big enough that we actually need a change in the internet infrastructure? And do we really need to move from Web2 to Web3 essentially?
Good question, Nat, and it really just depends on your perspective. I think for users, we've been used to free services and ever increasing quality of experiences that the Web2 companies provide. And Web2 companies have generally gotten a lot better. Like if you look at where technology was 15, 20 years ago and the number of people on the internet versus today, it's drastically different. Many of us spend many hours looking into our devices, and we get a lot of value out of them. But we've all made an interesting trade that we've given up data in exchange for these free services. We're not completely sure what the value of our data is, but looking at the value of these companies, it's probably quite a bit. And these companies seem to benefit from this a lot. If you look at this from the perspective of these companies, I don't think many of them actually started out to be as significant or as large. If you had asked some of my colleagues who are early investors in some of the leading Web2 companies globally, and including ourselves, what we've seen in India is no one thought these companies would be as big as they are. the monopoly effects that come because of these companies and their models has surprised all of us. So I don't think the people behind them are inherently evil or megalomaniac and want to take over the world. It's just they've been put in this position. If you look at the perspective of governments and regulators, they are worried about how much power has got in hands of such few folks. While it does make it easier to control and censor when there are single large entities, when these entities are not within your national control, it does make it more difficult to have control. So you've seen many jurisdictions put in data localization laws and force these companies to have servers hosted on their soil. So if they ever needed to disconnect those services, that there was a feasible way. So it's a complicated subject. I think it's one now that is gaining increasing attention over recent years as the large platform companies have decided to exert their power in certain aspects around broader societal issues. And I think it totally warrants a discussion about changing the way the internet infrastructure is set. And it'll bring certainly a much more level playing field for users and companies, because today it's not. But it's a complicated subject, and I think it's one that people should look at it from many angles.
Yeah, thank you so much for pointing that out. So currently we're using Web2, but in exchange for these services of the platforms that are in Web2 today, we're giving out our data, which we have no idea how much value it is until the data get exploited or they gets hacked by a third party who we don't intend to. But that's also a secondary kind of effect that we don't usually realize when we're using the platform. So given that there is this Web3 that people have been talking about, do you think Web3 is the solution, Sandeep? In other words, why Web3? How does it actually solve those problems for us?
Yeah, so I mean, Web3, like the basic premise of Web3, is fundamentally what solves some of these issues that the other panelists just discussed. The data being controlled by single parties, where they can, also it's not only about benefiting from data, but also it's about infringing the privacy of the individuals, right? So Web3, one of the core goals of Web3, especially the blockchain part of Web3, although is a very larger term, like generally, it has kind of become a narrative that, Web3 means crypto, which is good for crypto overall. But Web3 also means some of the other technologies like, artificial intelligence and things like that. But point being that, for these crypto or blockchain enabled, technologies, what we are doing is giving digital native ownership to the end individual, wherein, the individual can control their data. That's the first thing. But also individuals can sovereignly own assets on the internet, where, as Shailesh was saying, that we are increasingly spending more and more time on our devices. I think very, very soon, like, the next generation will be spending 70-80% of their lives on these devices only. And when that happens, the value of items in the digital world will also be very, very meaningful. That's why, like, we needed a digital native, property rights or kind of ownership system, which blockchains provide. So that's one of the biggest things, how Web3 can solve some of these things. Secondly, like as we also said that, being a sovereign individual, censorship is also a very big issue in the Web2 world. For example, let's say if you are an influencer on Instagram or some other big, social media platform, and then, suddenly, your views are not liked by the company, and then you are banned from the deplatformed from that particular platform, right? We know that the president of US got deplatformed and all that. Imagine, the same things can happen to any particular creator. And when you get banned, the thing is that if you have spent like 10 years of your life on something, right? And then suddenly you get deplatformed from that platform, like, after having built millions of followers, then you go out with nothing, right? Instead of that, imagine there were social media platforms where you as a creator, if you want to move out, the power is in your hand. If you want to move out, you can move out of the platform with your followers, right? Imagine that kind of world, right? So you can instantly see that, yes, that seems to be pretty fair. That seems to be something that how these creator platforms and social platforms should be built. So, and then Web3 again is kind of enabling. Right now we are not there yet, but Web3 is enabling all of these things, in the future, with few technologies where users can save their large amount of their data safely in their controlled storage spaces, as well as, like, we get to have some more decentralized. Right now we are only talking about decentralization of transactions and asset ownership, but eventually I feel that this decentralization will also go into hosting, larger compute services like web hosting and all that, and as well as, like, as it was already happening on the data storage also. And then we will, maybe 5 to 10 years from now, we'll have that full blossoming of this entire Web3. And I think then it should be able to solve many of the problems that we are seeing in the Web2 today.
So me just to dig in a little bit more on what does the end goal actually look like for us as consumers of the internet. Shailesh, do you mind sharing your view on that? How will Web3 actually replace Web2? How will user behavior change from this paradigm shift from the consumer perspective?
So I think it's going to take some time. It'll happen in phases. Look, we're fortunate to have Sandeep on the call, and Polygon is the leader in scaling blockchains. That is the fundamental biggest issue with blockchains replacing Web2 services. Web2 has been heavily optimized. It's been scaled to hundreds of millions and billions of users across services. It can support tens of thousands of transactions, or even hundreds of thousands of transactions per second on services. Blockchains are a long way away from being able to do similar feats. The overhead in decentralization, the overhead to achieve consensus without a single party being able to govern a transaction is a lot higher. There's a number of very core fundamental technologies, which again, Polygon is at the forefront of developing, which will very much aid in this effort. But they will take time to mature and scale and be available to lots and lots of application developers. So we see aspects of your digital identity being decentralized first. The simplest examples that we will probably see at some scale this year are NFTs, where people will be able to own and show and display and with provenance their digital assets on major social networks. I think Twitter has started this already with their profile pictures. We'll see much more mainstream platforms add this capability soon. And with that, I think that will introduce a lot more users into the space and get awareness of what people can do with these types of digital assets. I think there's lots of knowledge or interest from consumers in speculation or investing in crypto. There's very little knowledge in what crypto fundamentally means. And a lighthouse service like NFTs, and it could be something else, or it could be a game as well, will bring this out to many more users. After that, as the technology scales and grows, more and more applications and services will become possible in decentralized ways, and we expect richer and richer experiences. Today, Web3 experiences couldn't host this Zoom call that we're on right now, or this or an event like you guys are hosting at this moment. They couldn't host a large social network. They just couldn't support it technically. But there'll be aspects that the Web2 companies support, and that will bring Web3 services much more mainstream, and we expect the snowball to build from there.
Thank you so much. I think that really is a good segue for me to turn the mic over to Sandeep again at Polygon. How far are we from getting blockchain to be fundamentally ready to scale the internet? What needs to happen? I know you're doing a lot of work on the background with Polygon. Can you please share a little bit more on what you're building and doing behind the scene with us?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that not only blockchains, but overall, like this decentralization revolution, how much time it will take, to be fully blossomed. I think with blockchains, we are only trying to solve the transaction level data, and that I think, right now, with all the blockchains included, we would be probably, we can probably take 5 to 10 million daily active users, not more than that. I think with the scalability approaches and the roll-ups and everything that are coming up in next 12 to 18 months, probably we'll reach, maybe with multiple blockchains, of course, not with one, maybe 50 to 100 million users in 12 to 18 months, and then probably scale from there in the coming years. Then apart from that, but that's only one part of this. Apart from that, like for this whole decentralized revolution to blossom, you will need decentralized hosting, somehow decentralized the file storage, which is already there, but that that has not fully blossomed yet, like the decentralized file storage, I'm saying. A lot of good projects are working on that. And some other ancillary products that you need. Like, for example, there are products like EPNS who are working on the decentralization of notifications. So there's a lot of things that goes into building these Web2 applications, right? The infrastructure, middleware, and all that. And slowly and steadily, larger and larger number of parts of these Web2 applications will become decentralized. And right now with blockchains, we are seeing one part of that only. So I mean, with if you ask me like how much time overall decentralized world will take, I would say it's still like 5 to 10 years from here, like where we'll start having, all of us start having like fully decentralized applications, decentralized hosting, decentralized transactions and everything. That's still like 5 to 10 years away. But reaching a place where a large number of human beings on this planet will have one or the other Web3 application on their phone, and they would be using something. I think that's fairly achievable within 5 years. I mean, that's what I hope, and we are working towards, where we can have that scalability for the blockchains plus the plus maybe some breakout applications which take it to the masses. I think NFTs and especially metaverse meme has done a lot for crypto. Like people instantly relate crypto with metaverse, although metaverse can be a much larger concept. But that's like some of these things like NFT in gaming, metaverse, they need to come out really big. After we have the scalability, then we can actually take it to a large number of human beings on this planet. Yeah.
Right. And over the past few years, we've seen huge developments from the infrastructure layer, both coming from layer 1 or layer 2, which is the protocols that are scaling up layer 1 blockchain. In the past, in 2018, even longer than that, maybe 2017 or so, there was a theory called Fat Protocol, which stated that the transaction layer or the protocol layer is going to be the layer that captures almost all of the value that happens in Web3, because data is no longer being captured by siloed, in a siloed manner by any type of applications, right? So it is pushed down the layer down to the transaction layer, which is the blockchain or the protocol level. Now, that is completely opposite from Web2 world, where applications were king. These centralized applications like Facebook, Amazon, Apple are the ones that are capturing the consumer data. So Sandy, I'd like to ask your thoughts on, do you think that when we transition towards Web3, the protocol layer, the blockchain layer, will that be the layer that captures the most value?
Yeah, thanks, Nat. I think that's a really interesting question, but I'm afraid my answer will be quite hypothetical and quite nuanced since we're still 100% focused on research and we're just kind of super focused on developing like a scaling solution that ZK EVM solution that works. So I don't know if Sandeep will agree with me since he probably has more experience in this, but my guess is that we need to improve the infrastructure layer to help scale the existing protocols before dApps could really start attracting more users and ultimately capturing even more value. And this is a place where projects like Scroll and Polygon comes in. I think the fat protocol theory has its appeal currently because A, we're super early in this protocol development process and there's still lots of things to be ironed out. And B, protocols run on amazing and very ambitious narratives right now. So like no sharding, like, TPS, blah, blah, blah. So these are all super attractive. And because they don't work seamlessly, so people still notice these protocols. And as such, like users pay a lot more attention and that generates more stories. And that supports a lot of the kind of movements in the market. In the long run, I think we'll see a future where hopefully the protocol layers will be so seamless and so usable that no one will even notice it. And then we will be entering an era where more rational investment, quote unquote, thesis will be applied to the application versus protocol discussion. I think some dApps in the last few years have already successfully found a business model that will continue to generate tens of millions of revenue a year. Whereas protocol layers, despite their enormous FDV, hasn't quite found I haven't seen at least a sustainable revenue model that will last in the 10 to 20 year horizon. So I think once the protocol layer is sufficiently useful, then dApp layer should be where the value is ultimately captured. And then that's the future. That's the kind of future that Scroll really wants to support.
Maybe Sandeep, can you share on what you think also in terms of the protocol versus the apps capturing value?
Yeah, I also agree with Sandy in that sense that fat protocol thesis for quite some time has been negated because especially if you see Ethereum also, a lot of dApps the DeFi dApps and NFTs and marketplaces and whatnot, many of them on the application level have accrued large amount of values. Like we have probably $500 billion worth of dApps on the space. So that itself kind of negates the fat protocol thesis in that sense. But I am a believer of that nothing is 0 and 1. There is always the truth lies always in between. And as we can see that as those applications are growing, Ethereum has also grown significantly. And Ethereum is producing around $10-15 million worth of gas fees every day, which is like a direct revenue for the miners, and which already makes it one of the highest revenue making companies in the world if you see it as a venture, right? Like if you go by $10 million, and I think the cost on Ethereum, like compared to the amount of fees being generated, would be, very, very, the margins will be pretty high on that. So I think, point being that, those dApps growing very fast on Ethereum have also accrued a lot of value back to Ethereum. But that's why, one other thing is, I feel that the platforms which are only building for, let's say, the TPS and low cost transactions and all that, they will have, because then there is a race to the bottom in terms of like how low the cost can go, right? And so there are a lot of nuances in that, like how the scaling platform should think about themselves, like how we, for example, how we think about Polygon, as for how Polygon will accrue value and all that. And a lot of protocols, especially on the scalability side, have to see that how they can accrue value. I am a strong believer that on layer 1, that level of scalability cannot be achieved, and that fat protocol thesis, especially if you're trying to build a scalable layer 1, it kind of completely gets negated, because layer 1 needs to be extremely decentralized, and for their decentralization you need a very strong asset which almost has the properties of hard money, kind of guarding the decentralization on that asset, which makes me feel that, layer ones, first of all, they have to play the decentralization game. And those assets, which are the native assets of the layer ones, will increasingly start reflecting the sort of, tendencies or qualities of hard money. And on that front, like there cannot be multiple such hard monies. That's why I strongly believe that the layer one game is a very limited one or two last man standing game max. But on the transaction layer, like that's why like transaction layers have to construct their tokenomics, their models as to how they can keep achieving long term value by the transaction fees that is being generated on these scalability networks. But it's very clear already that definitely it's neither zero or neither one, like neither it's completely accruing to the protocol, the fat protocol thesis, or neither it is accruing to the only the dApp. So the result will be somewhere in the middle.
Awesome. So Shailesh, do you think the picture will shift now that the infrastructure layer is more mature?
Well, I think there's many ways that dApps or applications can generate value and scale that could be quite unique. Like if you think of something like Uniswap, which is one of the leading applications out there, despite being for a long time open source and being completely transparent of what they do, they were still able to generate a very strong network effect based on the liquidity that the protocol had in its various pools. So it made itself the leading choice, and it still tended towards centralizing towards one winner in that space. So dApps and Uniswap, because of the brand and the trust they generated, even when they launched on other chains, including when they recently launched on Polygon, they were able to garner a very significant market share. So things like liquidity-oriented network effects or brand-oriented network effects, those things don't change. We're all still human. We'll all go to the store with the most selection. We'll all go to the brands that we trust the most, and we'll navigate to those. So there is still lots of value for dApps, even though they may not control as much data as they did in the Web 2 world. That they can generate. Similarly, I know other protocols like Lido Finance in liquid staking seemingly is getting towards a monopoly in the staking space. And look, even Polygon, at least we see in this part of the world, is becoming an obvious choice for most people to build on. It's a platform of choice, and so. There is still lots of room for the non-layer one applications or enablers to generate a lot of value. But yes, a lot of the value will, in fact, I think, shift away from both the application and the infrastructure to the user. And if you pivot to thinking about the creator economy, the fact that a music artist, even today, makes very little money off selling their music, makes most of their money on tours. So makes their money already in a decentralized way. I think the Web3 allows people to do that online and via their core proposition of music or their core art. So it will be a much more fluid value chain. There still will be wonderful opportunities to invest across applications, infrastructure. But yeah, the greatest winner here should be the user.
I love that answer. It's going to be a much more fluid value chain because both protocol layers and the app layers will be able to create and capture value, but the greatest beneficiary will be the consumer. I'm going to open the floor to the audience. We have one question that came up. It says, Jack Dorsey said, Web3 will never be truly decentralized because VCs will own them, and VCs are all about profits. I'm going to ask the VC in the room, Shailesh, what do you think?
Jack is obviously a very smart and sophisticated entrepreneur. I think he is referring to certain projects that are less centralized than others. And I think, look, in the beginning, there is some benefit to be centralized. It lets you move fast. It lets you take decisions quickly. It lets an entrepreneur, take a view that is unique and maybe contrarian, and build towards something much faster. And a VC or a small group of folks supporting that individual or that team can help them achieve a lot more in a short period of time. I think where I maybe disagree with Jack is that he says that for many networks, I think certain networks like Ethereum, they aren't perfect, but they are fairly decentralized, and much more so than the alternatives in this space. I think, look, VCs do have some role to play. Rightly or wrongly, VCs have been involved in building very large tech organizations for a long time, and been involved in some tough days in many of those organizations and seen how they scale. They can assist Web3 companies as well in achieving their objectives. So, the answer is all things. These things, there's a scale, and it's different for different projects. Some are more centralized, some are less. We obviously would like things to be as decentralized, to give as much control to the users. That will take time, and being decentralized out of the get-go may not let you achieve as much as you need to achieve in order to win what is a very competitive space. So we think this will get better, but yes, he's not completely wrong in what he's saying, but there's good reason for it.
I want to add to that also, because this is a very important point, and I feel that even the first thing what we see or what Web3 is enabling is you see the example of Polygon, right? So we did not raise much of VC money. We kind of did a lot of groundwork and all that and succeeded, and then we were able to raise money. So, but if you see that how the community would have acted in that, right? So community was able to get into Polygon at very, very low valuations, wherein now the VCs have joined Polygon at a much larger valuation, right? So if you see, that is only possible in Web3. What I don't agree with Jack's statement though is that he's in one brush he's painting the entire Web3. As Shailesh was saying that Ethereum is very different. There are multiple such protocols which are very different and evolved very differently. At least Web3 is offering a new paradigm for the community and these community-owned businesses. And also, I also want to say that the VC model is also changing. I'm as Sequoia, they are changing and bringing a lot of new changes into their structures and all that. And we feel that I feel that even the VC structures will evolve and will be very, very different than how they are in the Web2 space.
That's great insight. And the last question will be for Sandy. This is from the audience as well. With the current political climate and mistrust, how likely would regulators and governments be inclined to encourage adoption of Web3, since these institutions have higher concern regarding governance?
Oh, yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I can only postulate to what regulators and governments might think. I think that the core conflict here as tech entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general, our role is to push society and push humanity forward. Whereas the core role of regulators and governments to make sure the rest of the humanity is not left behind and well protected during this very difficult transition for everybody as humans as a whole. And so the governance issue within Web3, I think, is one of many, and it will bring up a lot of interesting regulatory challenges, as I think most governments will need to start drafting new frameworks, and in order to figure out what it means to be able to kind of protect their population and protect the people who are living within their jurisdiction. I think that the book, Sovereign Individual, alluded to a potential future where there's going to be more instability as these massive kind of Web3 companies will will be kind of amassing more and more resources and eventually kind of possibly having a bigger and bigger social impact on society. But yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think we'll see a lot of regulatory innovation as well as kind of technology innovation as well in the years to come.
Thank you so much, everyone. And great. It was a great panel discussion. And thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, Nat.
Thank you, Nat.